Well, ladies and gentlemen, as promised, I have another fantastic guest. This is a real exciting one for me too. A fantastic Army veteran on board with us today, Betsy Ross, author of the Fight series of books. We're going to get into that for sure. And Betsy, just for fun, I like to do this because it is the Lima Charlie show. So just for fun, make sure our comms are working. I'll say radio check. How do you read me over?
Rage loud and clear.
Yeah, perfect. So let's get started. I'm very familiar with your work. I'm super excited that we connected because I was talking with you during a recent show with Willis on Homefront Sit Rep. I saw you in the comments there. It was awesome. So I'm glad you're here. But for our listeners that aren't familiar with you, let's just go back a little bit. Tell me about obviously you have an awesome name and I'm sure there's a family story there, but I'd like to know what your background was like, why you joined the service, particularly branch and job. I'm really curious about all those details.
Well, I was actually the black sheep in my family. Most of my family members, like both my parents, grandparents, they were all Air Force. I'm the only one in
Oh,
my family that went Army. Uh, it just felt more me. I mean, I went to the Air Force recruiter. Like my mom was there, both my parents, like, this is what we're gonna do. And it just didn't feel right. So I went to school first, and then I guess I built the confidence where I was like, I think I can pass this PT test. And because I was worried about the PT tests comparatively to all the other branches. And I was out doing push-ups with the guys. So I was like, Army it is. We're gonna do Army. And so I went Army, but my experience with the military was definitely bittersweet, especially getting out. And that's when a whole journey, not so great journey, but it was what I call my dark period of my life, that I really learned a lot about myself and helping people get out of that darkness as well. And that's where the fight series kind of came from. Um, but yeah, that's pretty much the quick sum up of that.
yeah, yeah. The books are great. Like I said, I know that that was great. Um, when you joined the service, I don't know what era that was, but what was the MOS and the initial training and how did that work initially for you?
I went 89 Bravo, which is ammunition specialist.
Nice.
Um, let's see, that was back in 2010.
Mhm.
And at that time, at least when I got to my first base, my first post was Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas. The civilians pretty much did all the handling of the ammo, unless we were in the field or something. So I didn't really get to do that. I was pretty much just a truck driver. It was an 88 Mike. I mean,
Like, yeah,
and of course doing all the random details because I was a private, but it was, I mean, I still had fun with that. It wasn't like, oh darn. But now if we went to the gun range, then yeah, I was part of that, but it wasn't elbows deep in anything super crazy at
yeah.
the time.
Yeah, that's a little bit after my time, but I saw that already happening where they were shifting a lot of jobs, even cooking. I mean, there's a lot of jobs where they just started to shift to civilian contractors,
Yeah,
which I always
unfortunately.
thought was a little bit, yeah, I always thought that was a little bit odd. But yeah, 88 mics, and I was with an A and O group. I used to drive 5 ton and some things like that with the 12 Bravos. So yeah, 88 mics and ammunition. That's the same pod. That's a good group. Yeah.
Pretty much.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's awesome. All right. So um as a transition from the service, like you said, that led into a path there. You want to elaborate on that and then like how you went from there to writing about things that were helping? Because what you're doing is I don't want to assume here, but I would think that it probably started as a way of helping you, but what it's really doing now is helping a lot of other people. So I'm really curious with the transition from the service and how that, went from that experience into paper and pen.
Absolutely. Um, well, I ended up being chaptered out. I was honorably discharged, but I was chaptered out due to a disability. I have nerve damage in my arm. VA doesn't recognize it, but I'm still fighting that. But during that time, I had just jumped into school because I didn't feel like I had anything. During that time, I did have those classes where those transition classes where they try to help you prepare for the outside world, but they didn't really seem to help me personally. Um, I felt like I was on my own all over again. I I I guess I really just felt stuck. I didn't even know who I was. I mean, I was still in my early 20s. I mean, yeah, I had an associate's degree already, prior to joining, but it was like, what do I do? Do I continue with that? Do I go home? Do I just start somewhere random? Do I stay where I am in El Paso? Do I didn't really know what to do. So I ended up going home just because that's what I thought I knew. And I thought it was a good place to start. Found out my family situation, I felt like an outcast. I really felt like a black sheep then because I felt like I couldn't communicate with them. I felt like I was just this body that didn't really have a soul. I mean, I was alive, but I wasn't. I didn't know what I was doing. But because I jumped into school, I was surrounded by high schoolers again, basically, because it,
Oh, sure.
you know,
Sure.
the young, really young civil generation. And so I was like, okay, y'all haven't left. I don't know anything you're talking about. And I felt like I was on the verge of arguments every day. People, I mean, it's a time to express yourself, and I get that. But I was in this angry state of mind where I was just trying to figure things out. And I was still drinking very heavily. And then my parents had divorced and sold the house, so I didn't have anywhere to live. I was living out of my truck, pretty much staying on campus and just sleeping there. I couldn't find a job for the longest time. Um, it was very rough because I was like, what's the point? I jumped into medical lab technology, which is my career now, but so it worked out. But at the time, it was like, I don't even know why I'm doing this. I'm surrounded by people complaining about things that don't mean anything. Um, Veterans don't want anything to do with me. My family can't communicate with me. I felt like I was at the lowest of the low, like the darkest point of my life. I had already tried committing suicide multiple times. I didn't feel like I was good enough to go to the VA. I didn't feel good enough to go to any of these veteran organizations because I don't have a cool story. I wasn't 11 Bravo. I felt like I had nothing. I signed up for everything. I was the gung ho soldier you don't want to be. I wanted to be, squared away all the time. And for a time, I was out doing push-ups with the guys. I was doing maxed down PT scores. I got a coin because of that. I did things physically, and then I became injured. And all of a sudden, I was like, oh, well, you're just a piece of crap trying to get out of PT. I felt offended by that. And then I felt kind of thrown in the bus by my chain of command. So I had like already this anxious and this anger and this, um, can't think of a better word for it, but I had a lot of anger. And because I couldn't work out like I wanted to, I was in pain 24/7, still am. And and of course, drinking very heavily. I didn't have friends. I was stressing out with school. Where was my next meal going to come from? I was eating peanut butter out of my truck. I was just trying to find the next couch to sleep on. I was trying to just feel normal again.
Right.
And so, in that midst of things, I ended up meeting my now husband. And because at the time, also, I was technically going through a divorce. I hadn't seen my husband in years, didn't know where he was. And I that was pretty much just on paper. Like I didn't, people would ask me, where is he? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't even think about that. He wasn't nice to me anyway. I don't want to know where he is as long as he's not anywhere near me. And so that it was just a very dark point. And then I met my husband and I started my career and then I had a family. And then I was like, you know, people need to talk about this. I felt like I couldn't talk to veterans. I couldn't talk to civilians. I couldn't really talk to anybody. And if I did have someone I served with talk to me, it felt like something was missing. I felt like I wanted to be back in the military knowing I couldn't join. There was a time I did try to join, and they're like, well, you're injured. You have to go to a doctor to sign off to say you're mission capable, deployable. And I'm not. So
Okay.
I couldn't prove that. So I was stuck in this very vicious cycle. I couldn't join like I wanted to, rejoin. I couldn't re up. I couldn't do anything communication wise. So I felt like I was fighting by myself. And I wanted to be a voice because I was like, there's a lot of things that are not mentioned in these transition classes that veterans don't talk about. What about those veterans who haven't deployed? What are those veterans who don't have a cool story? I, I mean, we're kind of just trying to make it. Why can't we feel like we're part of that same team? Where's that camaraderie? Some of us I learned that a lot of organizations that are out there have very specific filters, as they should, but I didn't feel like I belonged. I didn't deploy. I mean, I have my limbs. I am going to school. I am, it was like I didn't fit anywhere. And so it was it was just a very hard time. So I just started writing it on paper. Always wanted to write a book anyway, but I wanted to be able to write it in a way where people felt what some of these veterans are feeling. These thoughts that some of us are actually having, even as we return home. Yeah, we know you. We may have known you when we were, childhood friends or maybe we're relatives, but that that old me is gone. I can't be that person right now because this is me now. And just being able to form sentences, being able to just be myself. I wasn't comfortable in my skin. I didn't want to be me. I mean, was already trying to commit suicide. I was trying to make plans. I was trying to get out of things. But I guess every day, a little bit, someone would say something that would just inspire me to keep going.
Yeah.
And it's those little things. And then I did have some people I did serve with, leaders, superiors that would kind of just say something. And I'm like, you're right. Because it was all of a sudden that PSC just came out in me and Joe, you're right. I got to keep going. And so it was just those little things that ended up being what really pushed me through. And then I did start the fight series, and that was my outlet. That was me screaming to the world, especially that first book.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. I went through the first. I'm on the second now, and folks, there's a series of that,
Okay.
and I wanted to encourage you to pick them up for your own knowledge and to share because what you've done is you've taken some scenarios of different veterans who had different experiences, and that's a big theme that I'd like to highlight on our show is that you can have a million people in the military. They're not exactly this. Like we all have our own unique, uh, whether you want to call it DNA or just our psychological thoughts going into the military. Why we join is not always the same. Why we stay in, if we stay in and re-up, is not always the same. Why we get out is not always the same. There are so many things and factors, and I love what you've done with this because, like I said, I'm only halfway through the series, but I just love it. And anyone that was in the military can immediately recognize this. And people that aren't, and this is where your comments online are just phenomenal. I don't know if you ever like do that, but on your reviews, you have like perfect reviews. You're one of the highest rated reviews of this category. And people that have nothing to do with the military. There's one on there particular, and I should have printed it out for you, but it's one of the top comments. It says something along the lines of, I don't know anyone in the military, which is why I wanted to read this book. And now I have to read the rest because you taught them something, and they're a professional, they're in healthcare, as a comment indicates. So you're helping connect the dots to people that are around the veteran that maybe, you mentioned something earlier I want to touch on. You felt like you couldn't talk to your family, you couldn't talk to your friends. That's how you were feeling. We have to recognize also as veterans that there's people around us who maybe really want to talk to us, but they don't know how. And I think the way you wrote this book is exactly what they need. That little nudge, that little nugget of information that they're going to go, oh, that's how I could address it with this person I care about. So I think you're probably, this book is probably a catalyst that's repairing some relationships out there, and you should be proud of that.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
It's with all the years that I felt like there was no hope, that just to hear that is a blessing
yeah,
because I didn't think I'd ever be heard.
yeah. So no, I love it. So okay, so you're writing this down really just to vent, really in a way, things that you need to share. How did you go from that to actually getting it published? Walk me through the mechanisms of how you decided to do that and how long did it take? I'll tell you after you answer me, but I'm curious from when you finish the book to when you actually publish it. Because we had another veteran on, and I always ask these questions, and someone's holding the record that I know you can't beat because it's more years than you're alive. But I'm curious on your process and from draft to completion and from completion to publishing.
The first book technically took about a year and a half to write to complete, even though they're short books, but it was because of I kept changing how I wanted it to be said. But the second book took me 6 months. So by 7 or 8 months, then I had it published, but that's because I wanted to go through a tedious process of, because like my husband is a veteran. He was 11 Bravo. So I was like, hey, does this make sense? Does the jargon make sense? Is it relatable? And then I had someone else read it for grammatical errors just in case, and then just to get a feel for what it was. But I went self-publishing because I don't like having a timeline. I don't want to be forced to, hey, we need another book out like now.
Right.
No, especially with Fight. Fight is a very special project. I didn't want anyone else involved. There was a time I tried to use Book Venture Publishing, but I didn't like them. But I ended up going back to self-publishing, and I did the rest of the series by that. Uh, I just like being on my own timeline, and because of how sensitive the topic is, I didn't want to rush it. I didn't want it to be too corny. I didn't want it to be, because it does jump around a little bit, but I wanted each character to have a voice in its own way. I wanted it to play a part that made sense, that can still get a voice out there regarding the stigmas we have in the veteran community and try to talk about as much as possible. Unfortunately, the only negative about the series is it barely grazes the surface of the issues we have. There are so many stories that need to be heard. There are so many people trying to find a voice, trying to um, describe these emotions, whether it's to their counselor or to their spouse or to their children, and they can't find the words. Like, I want to say it, but I don't know how. And I've had some good testimonies because of the Fight series saving relationships. So it's even with everything I had to go through. I mean, it's really kind of worked out, but it really sucked. But I really am glad to hear that people are listening to what a lot of veterans were trying to say.
Yeah, you're giving them a voice. And I did see the special dedication on the first book for sure to some particular people that you're aware of that, unfortunately the reality of what veterans of we'll say our era, because global war and terror the last 20 some odd years, the one of the key differences just from a logistical standpoint compared to, let's say, World War II or World War One, those troops would go overseas and they might be gone 2 years or longer. Then they come home and they're done. They're done with their service. Going into Korea, sort of similar, a little bit short of a timeline. Maybe it was a year and a half, and then they're done. Vietnam, as we all know, was mismanaged top to bottom. But even the folks that were active duty, not even recruited, they would typically go and do their year and come home. Still be on active duty, but they were stateside. Rare occasions, we've talked about it on the show, some Vietnam vets did 2 years, and that was typically the end of that. Our era, heavily backfilled by National Guard and reservists, saw multiple rotations inside 3 years and different terrains, right? Afghanistan, Iraq, Ukraine later, there's all sorts of pockets where these service members were rotated and rotated and rotated. There's no adjustment period to that. You're not raising a family in between that with a clear head. You're not going back to school with a clear head. There's so many things. So as you indicate, and it's covered in a number of different scenarios you lay out there, is when people wonder, well, gee, why is this person all jacked up? Why can't they get their stuff together? Well, have you thought about trying to, leave your way of life and then come back to it? And by the way, your kids got a little bit older, your spouse did things a little bit differently while you're gone, your coworkers, you lost the promotion, all these things you're trying to fit into their lives. It's not the other way around. So yeah, people get into we'll say funks, and the funks can turn into something more devastating when maybe they don't get the proper benefits they should have from the VA. They don't get the proper respect that you should have gotten when you get home from fellow veterans. They don't get the proper, warm fuzzies or whatever. You compound that, and then yeah, you start to get into a darker place, in a darker
Yeah.
place. And we all know we've lost more people from self-inflicted violence than we did in combat in the last 23 years. So you're addressing those topics, you're educating people on that. And my Lord, I mean, this should be like mandatory required reading across the board because people need to understand that. We're losing people to a quiet fight. We should be screaming about it. we've lost tens of thousands to every, the factors of how many of suicides versus combat killed is astronomically high. It's ridiculously high. And it's because some people don't have a way to get that out. And then it gets too late and they are too isolated, like you were for a while. They are without a path. They were without someone like you to write that down and say, look, you're not alone. You're not alone. This is unfortunately a systemic problem. This is something we need to have an SOP about, and you're starting to help navigate that. So, but I want to commend you for, you highlighted some individuals there. Um, and you're getting the word out. You're doing a lot of marketing. I know we met initially because of another great shout out to Willis out there, home front sit rep. He's got a great show a couple times a week there. Um, so tell me about that aspect of it, because I'm always curious. When you say self-publish, that's a lot of work, right? You got to do your own push. You don't have someone out there putting it in the Barnes and Nobles for you. Tell me some of those details and what's been successful and where you might need some help. Maybe one of our listeners can help you with some areas you're trying to get more exposure with.
The hardest part about self-publishing is the marketing side of it. I mean, yeah, it's a lot of hard work to get the words out there and trying to edit it, but you got to self-format, you got to do your own stuff. But that's the marketing is the hardest, uh, especially depending on the topic. Unfortunately, with fight is a sensitive topic, and a lot of people don't want to talk about it, and I understand. But and because it's not a self-help book, I mean, fiction, PTSD is real. It's a very taboo catch 22 topic, and I understand that, which just makes it more difficult for me. But really, when I started publishing in 2017, the best outlet ended up being Twitter, or what's now X, because of how many authors are on there.
Okay.
And then I ended up how many authors use that, because they use writing hashtag writing community. If you have X, you can do that, and you just
Okay.
see so many authors, veteran authors, all sorts of types of genre authors, and that ended up helping me really get the word out. I tried to do Instagram, not really. I mean, it kind of got word, but Facebook, not really. I feel more shadow banned there, and now I've just recently used TikTok, which TikTok I'm slowly starting to get views,
Yeah.
but I can't really correlate book sales versus that. Um, I'm just trying to navigate ways on how to promote it, because it's not necessarily a happy book. You want to say, yeah, it's Christmas, come get a book that
Right.
might make you cry. It's like
Right. Right.
I don't know how to market it when it comes to like holidays or birthdays or anything like that. But if you are someone genuinely looking for a book that, hey, these people are pro veterans, they want to learn more about veterans, they want to help the veteran community, fight is your fight is where you want to be. Because I wrote the book short because I wanted veterans who do have PTS or TBI or anything, but they want to read, or they just want to have something military related, that they could read it. Or if they want to find out what it's about, they were able to read it. I have readers who can only read one page at a time, and there's no shame in that at all. But I mean, the marketing though is the absolute most difficult. But networking has probably been the most ideal, because I do want to get more involved with the veteran organizations. I do want my book to be a part of that the coping and the helping of spreading the awareness on mental health,
Right.
suicide awareness, and veterans awareness in general. Because fight touch base with all of that. We have stigmas too. We have bad apples. We have bad leaders. We have, people who are unfortunately in our ranks, and they do bad things. And that also adds trauma too. Maybe that individual may have never deployed, but guess what? They may have had a bad leader. We have sexual assaults going on all the time in our ranks. We have abuse. We have, racial slurs. We actually have prejudiced people in the ranks, and they ended up at the top somehow. Don't know how, but they do. And they do bad things too. And all of that plays into that transition process. People think, well, you've never deployed. How can you have PTSD? Do you know my superiors?
Right.
How they talk down to everybody? I mean, superiors kind of do in a sense, but I meant like prejudice wise, um, Maybe they didn't like women. I saw that too.
Sure.
They seem more harsh on women, and that can leave some scars in their own way. And sexual assaults, rapes, we have those all the time. And that carries with us when we get out of the uniform as well. So uh, there's just so much to unpack when it comes to the stigmas and what we can talk about as far as mental health. Not everyone's thinking of suicide when they get out, but there's some pain, there's some, things that they don't want to talk about in there. And that's fine, but when they're ready to talk, I just hope someone is there and just willing to listen, even if it's not about the topic. You don't have to talk about the situation. You can talk about anything. Just opening up that door can make such a big difference where
Yeah.
you feel like it's okay.
And I think that's what the non-military folks reading your book are going to pick up on this is, reach out to that individual you're hesitating to talk to. They actually need that. They're if you're wondering why they're quiet, it's because they're not going to start the conversation, not with you. So, people need to be encouraged to talk to their sibling or their neighbor or their coworker or whatever when they know that, hey, I've noticed she's a little bit more reserved than she was before she went off to boot camp or whatever. Those are the things that I'm telling you, you're really helping folks with understanding that. Now, I want to back up a minute because I'm mostly an AM radio guy, but thanks to Meg, producer Meg, awesome as she is, she's pushed us into the the new era here, and we have Twitter and X, it was Twitter, now it's X. We have YouTube, we have some of these things, and folks might be listening or watching now. We're on Spotify, for example. But I want to go back to because I'm curious about this, and you could teach me something here. You said hashtag, and then you put writers, and that got your book into
Okay.
groups of like other folks that might be authors or people that are maybe tracking new books. Is that the idea there? There's like groups of
Mhm.
writers that kind of network with each other?
Yes. Well, when you put hashtags, it just makes you, if anyone searches that, they'd be able, your post would pop up. Writing community, hashtag writing community is what a lot of authors use. A lot of authors, they help promote other authors. Hey, authors, it's self promo day. And then in the comments, go ahead and post your book, your art, your poetry, your whatever you want. And people would do that and go, and they would just help repost that or reshare it, share
Okay.
it. And so, because of the amount of authors I had, that's where I began getting reviews. And that's where I learned reviews really do help sell books. I could talk about Fight all day. I was like, you need to read it. It's a great book. But other people need to say it because I'm biased, of course.
And
So
and
they people have
readers,
to.
yeah, and readers read. So if a reader is looking for a book and then they read reviews, it gives them the comments. Let me ask you
Mhm,
about that hashtag idea because maybe this will help
mhm,
you, or maybe you've already done this, so I apologize if it's redundant. I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to get your book promotions into groups of mental health people. Like maybe you could do a hashtag counselor or hashtag therapist or what have you, or hashtag Al-Anon. Don't overlook the fact that there are people in our communities that are so devastated by addiction or mental health of someone in their family, someone they love that they don't know how to deal with. So they go to these groups for their own mental health, right? Because you can't always help somebody. Sometimes they reject the help, but it hurts the individual, the caregiver, the person who wants to be a caregiver. So I think groups like that, people like that are getting together, or people treating veterans, or people treating, folks going through trauma that don't have I mean, you're laying out all the scenarios. I would assume as I continue past book two, there's going to be more scenarios that highlight all the different facets to this. I would encourage you to try to get out to those groups because, like I said earlier, this should be like required reading. If you're going to treat mental health of any level, this is the type of material you should be familiar with. So,
I have attempted to use like hashtag mental health and hashtag PTSD and addiction and real talk and let's talk. And I try to use different things, but it's hard to, unless you tag certain people, maybe, or tag some organizations, companies that are into helping veterans. Um, but it's it's definitely slow going because it took a couple years before I started getting traction on the reviews, and the reviews really help sell books. They really do.
Yeah.
And then I've had people from the UK and Canada, and I've had some friends in India, made
Oh,
some
that's cool.
awesome people over there, and because they're
International
allies of
author right
America.
here. That's fantastic.
Yes, yes. So I've got to meet some pretty amazing people from all over, even the British Army. They said the jargon's different,
Mm,
but the situations are the same. And that
yeah.
alone, it was, I mean, I knew we're all human, but just to hear it from someone from another country, they may not understand the jargon, but the situations, the mental health ideas and the processes, the depression, thinking of suicide, or just feeling just sad from a song or something, it's real. It hit them. And that was actually pretty cool. And just being able to communicate with people across the world about this issue is it's pretty amazing. And it's it's amazing that we can also think outside the box where even our allies, their armies probably need help getting the word out as well. And that was very real. It was a very surreal moment where it kind of just hit me. It was
Yeah.
like, I knew we weren't alone, but to hear someone say, yeah, I served and we're hurting just the same,
Yeah.
it means a lot.
Yeah.
We have a
Yeah.
lot out there hurting.
Absolutely. I mean, we always, and I do this on the show from time to time. We'll have certain days where we talk about certain campaigns or wars, and I'll highlight just to educate folks on, like, how many service members we lost and things like that. But I always try to reference the allies as well, because that does not always make the news. I mean, I spent some time in the Middle East, and there was folks there from Australia. There was we had at least 6 countries I can think of that were present in our areas, and I'm not sure how much. I'm ignorant. I'm just flat out ignorant to how much, if any, support they get when they go back home. I don't know how their cultures treat them when they come home. I do know Canada, because I live right near Canada. I'm 10 minutes south, upstate New York. I do know Canada has a very, I believe, a very impressive way of honoring their fallen. They literally have these incredibly long processions of bringing the fallen home. I mean, every single one of them has essentially I don't want to say parade, that's not right, but a long procession, a very quiet and intentionally quiet ceremony to bring them and lay them to rest. So yeah, to your point, we certainly didn't start the wars we're in, but we certainly expanded campaigns we've been in the last couple decades. We've included other countries, and that's super impressive that you have folks in other countries reaching out to you that have read your book, and they're like connecting to their story. That's awesome.
Mhm.
Yeah. Your writing
Yes.
style is transcended all. That's really cool. That's a feather in your cap there.
Yes. Well, because I did have a lot of pushback originally, which was made me a little nervous. I was like, but I wrote it away for a reason. People don't like it that it bounces around with the characters' perspectives, but I wanted to do that to make it more personable for each character,
Yeah.
for the readers to feel their thoughts and their emotions. But and then of course the rest of the style was kind of eccentric as well with the flashbacks and everything else. But I did it for a reason. So early on, I was very hesitant, and I was like, well, if I only sell one book, then I got to vent. I mean,
Right.
it kind of was what it was.
Right.
And then I got, well, people don't need to see the military from this perspective. You know, you didn't deploy, you don't know what you're talking about, you weren't there, can't talk about what you don't know about.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, you deployed. What do you
Yeah.
talk about it?
Yeah.
You got to talk about it.
Yeah. Don't
Who's
just
going to talk about
identify
it?
a problem, come up with the solution and share your knowledge. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Um, I'm a very understanding person. I'm just gonna just kind of get it started. Okay, fights out there, read it,
Yeah.
and then you take it a next step.
Yeah. Well,
I'm all about that.
yeah, walk me through it. I don't want to skip anything for our listening audience that might be just on the radio. Please list the exact titles, because I know there's a series of 4 at least that I've seen online. I'm on the second one. And then clarify exactly where they should pick up a copy that best benefits you. Keep in mind, we're very supportive of our guests, obviously. So please be clear about that, and I'll make sure it's all online as well.
Okay. Book one of the Fight series is just called Fight. And then book two is Fight to Fight Again. The third book, Fight to Fight Back. And fourth book, which is the final one, is Fight to Fight On. Those are all available on audio, Kindle, and paperback on Amazon. And then there is a Fight Collection edition, which is all four books in one. Basically, just all interconnected into one. And that is available on Amazon as well, only hardcover at this time. I do have an Etsy shop, Veteran Shenanigans, which can also, the books can be purchased there if you want signed copies, or if you just want to support through that outlet instead of Amazon, that is perfectly fine as well. But I also have a website of www.fightwithbetsyross.com. I try to post any events I might go to, like I was at Hero Stock recently. There's some updated pictures on there. And then, of course, the links to the books directly. I try to post some reviews. You can leave a review there if you prefer to leave a review there instead of Amazon or Goodreads. But yeah, but that's where I try to keep most of my communication, is the Fight website.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll be picking up the 4-pack there, as it were. Get a hard copy of it.
Good.
Put it right here on the shelf. That's fantastic. Yeah, so folks, definitely check that out and support her. I just love what you're doing. Now, I want to ask you, I try to have some fun with this, and maybe it's not fun for everyone, but I like to do a little time travel, just for fun. Because you went through a lot. You went through a ton, and you did that for others. You did that for your country, and now you're doing it for the veteran community. And you've done both of those areas of your life with honor, and I thank you for that. But you went through a lot to get there. So, and you went through some dark times. Now, with everything you experience now, and if you could go and just talk to yourself, when you realize you want to be in the Army instead of the Air Force, right? You want to be different, which is great because that's my preference, is the Army. My father was Air Force. We could talk about that sometime. But what would you say, if anything? What would you, good, bad, or indifferent? What would be the communication with your younger self if you had just like a minute or so?
I guess the first thing I would say at this point is to keep fighting the fight. That, well, I guess the more naive myself, since I'd be talking to myself, is embrace the suck, because that was one of my very infamous phrases, as it is in the Army anyway. But keep fighting the fight, and to um, I had a dream and goal to make it as a soldier, and I did succeed in that. But it doesn't mean that I failed the mission. I may not understand it at the time, but the mission is beyond the uniform. And so to take in everything now while you can, while wearing the uniform, but even after it comes off, that fight does not end. You're going to lead even outside of the uniform. So to take in a deep breath and to keep fighting the fight even off the battlefield. Those are probably the words I'd probably say.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, I love that. The mission certainly does not end out of the uniform. That's fantastic. And you're proving it every day. So, well, thank you so much, Betsy. This is a real fun talk. I appreciate your time today. And folks, again, this is Betsy Ross, Army veteran, okay, author. Go ahead and check out her book series. And if you're online, of course, everything will be down below. You can just, don't even hesitate. Click, 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 order it. And maybe you can get an autographed copy, maybe. Who knows? So,
yeah.
All right, Betsy. Well, thanks so much. And let's do this again sometime. I'd like to catch up with you. And certainly I'll be reaching out to you after I finish the rest of the series.
Definitely. Would love to hear it.
All right, folks, take a short break. Stand by.